Facebook. Sorry. YouTube says that I'm live now at 12:31 a.m. on Saturday, the 5th of November. So very early Saturday morning, and we just got through day one of the Ontario Educational Workers Strike. Schools across Ontario, in my area, in Ottawa and Peel and Toronto, I believe most of the schools in Ontario are closed, and I feel for the kids who are suffering right now because they're once again being robbed of their education. After the numerous disruptions of the past, starting in 2020, 2021, and now here we are in late 2022, and it's happening again. Kids are having their lives disrupted. I'm 56 years of age, and everything that's gone on for the past 2+ years, I am grateful on a personal level that it happened when I'm this age. I'm not missing my teenage years or my childhood years or my early 20s. What kids have sacrificed over the past 2+ years is exponentially, they've suffered exponentially more than I have, or those of my age. You do not get, I have, my age notwithstanding, I have a young guy in grade 4, and after all the disruptions of the past 2 years, now he's once again doing remote learning, and remote learning, especially at that age, is absolutely pathetically horrible. I don't know if anyone watching this will have, if you've gone through it, you know how horrible it is. A bunch of kids sitting in front of a computer screen. Tommy, you need to mute your computer. Jenny, stop playing with your dog. Pay attention. It's ridiculous. Kids just walk away from their screen. A lot of kids just tapped out and said, I'm done with this. And they haven't been getting educated at all. It's horrific what they've had to go through. And it's difficult for me to have sympathy for the CUPE members. That's the Canadian Union of Public Employees. I want to make one thing clear. This is not the teachers. I've spoken to some people and they've referred to this as a teacher strike, which it is not. It's the educational workers. These are educational assistants, janitorial secretary. These are the support staff. And they are not well paid for a professional type job, like being an educational assistant and working with children who have learning disabilities and behavioral challenges. And the secretary, in a fashion, I look upon it like in the healthcare sector. In the healthcare sector, doctors are paid exceeding, comparatively very well when it comes to nurses, but nurses are the backbone of the healthcare sector. Well, teachers are, comparatively speaking, incredibly well paid. Many of them make over $100,000 a year or in and around that figure in Ontario. And meanwhile, that educational assistant, the custodian, the secretary, some of them are only making, I think it tops out around $39,000 a year. And the simple fact of the matter is that is not a living wage in Ontario. Certainly not in anywhere. If you're living in the GTA, if you're living in Ottawa, if you're living in any large urban center, $39,000 is going to be hard to live on. But I support the CUPE workers. They have a legal right to strike. They're doing nothing illegal in going out on strike. However, what Doug Ford and his government have done is they have declared the strike illegal. And in order to do that, they had to invoke a clause within our charter, which is called the notwithstanding clause, which basically says, notwithstanding that this violates Canada's Constitution, we're doing it anyway. And it's similar to what we've all been living under for the past 2+ years, under the guise of a phony emergency. Notwithstanding the fact that you have the legal right to open a business, notwithstanding that fact, because we're declaring a health emergency, you specific people, you small business owners, you have to close your business. You have to lose your homes, your jobs, your life savings. Not if you work at Costco, not if you work at Loblaws, not if you work at Amazon. You're okay. We're going to look after the big boys. The Weston family will be fine, but we're going to hammer the little guy. And this is where I find it difficult to have sympathy for the educational workers, simply because the damage being done to our kids is real. It is real. And I'm back and forth on this issue. I believe in the rule of law, and I do not believe in abrogating people's constitutional and charter rights on a whim under the guise of an emergency just because you can. And there's a paradox that takes place because so many people who supported the government's handling of the Ottawa protest, they supported Justin Trudeau's invocation of the Emergency Measures Act in order to get to handle the trucker convoy protest in Ottawa back in January, February of this year. And yet now, so they were all for the government being heavy-handed in abrogating the rights, the constitutional and charter rights of citizens. They were all for it. And now, when it comes to Ontario's education workers, are all opposed to Doug Ford and his trying to handle this emergency situation where children are being damaged. And the damage from closing the school is real. In the case of the Ottawa protest, what was the problem? The problem was that a number of Ottawa citizens were complaining that they were traumatized, that they were being terrorized by these protesters, because people in Ottawa couldn't handle seeing thousands of people dancing, happy, loving, peaceful, hugging, walking around without masks and without distancing. And they could not deal with people refusing to give in to the fear of COVID. Because basically that's what it boiled down to. The people who were in Ottawa during that protest basically thumbed their nose at the government messaging. The government and media programmed the population to be living in deathly fear of the novel and deadly coronavirus. And tens of thousands of Canadians went down to Ottawa and said, no, we're not going to live in fear. I've got Kevin chiming in. They were fine with the other protest before the truckers and after the truckers. Yeah, and this is this paradox, this weird dichotomy where, on the one hand, you support the government jumping all over people's constitutional rights and freedoms in Ottawa, but when it comes to Ontario trying to protect the education of our children, well, no, we've got to side with the teachers, not with the teachers, with the educational workers. And this is going to drag on and on. There's a word in the word is Schadenfreude. It's a German-based word. Kevin's commenting. He's saying they walk the same street, same crowd, one dangerous, one not. I'm not sure exactly what you're trying to say, Kevin, but this situation is horrific. I wish now what's happening, if you're not following it closely, and I don't claim that I know everything about it, but from what I understand, the Ford government is imposing a 4-year contract onto the educational workers, these QP members, Canadian Union of Public Employees. They're imposing a contract on them, and hence they're going to there was a hearing with the Ontario Labor Relations Board that was taking place on Friday. I haven't read the results of that. I haven't seen that. I don't know if it's been reported on yet. And what the government was trying to do was to force the workers back to work. Now, just because they try to force them, the workers, the educational workers, can defy the court order. And it's what Doug Ford is doing is legal illegal. It's like what Justin. It's like the vaccine mandates that were thrust upon Canadian federal government employees. Canadian federal government employees were told that they had to take the jab or they would lose their jobs, and that is illegal. And that violates Canada's charter. It violates all manner of codified legislation that guarantees security of the person and bodily autonomy. That is illegal, but they did it anyway. And Ford is using, in the case of Trudeau, in the case of clearing the Ottawa protest, it was a legal protest. You're allowed to protest in Ottawa. Protests happen in Ottawa all the time. And it was the most peaceful, loving protest you're ever going to find with that many people. I'm not saying there wasn't an isolated incident here or there, that there wasn't an idiot walking around with a Confederate flag. There was, but you deal with individual idiots as individual idiots. You don't paint the entire group based on one moron who probably was planted there by those seeking to delegitimize what was a legal and legitimate protest. Kevin is saying that they deem one dangerous and and one not. The danger from the danger of the damage being done to our kids by closing the schools is exponentially greater than the damage that was done to the citizens of Ottawa. The people in Ottawa who were traumatized. Pardon the harshness of my words, but suck it up. If you're too afraid to go outside because of a bunch of people who are dancing around, hugging, laughing, smiling, unmasked, shaking hands, embracing, if that traumatizes you, well, then put on a hazmat suit and get over yourselves. I know that sounds harsh and not very kind, but the trauma that individual was going through because of their emotional state compares nothing to the individual who's being forced choose between taking a potentially dangerous injection or losing their job. People have died after getting these injections. That's a simple fact. Well, it's rare. Well, even if it is rare, And I think that's debatable as to how rare it is. But even if it is rare, it's still an individual's choice whether they want to take that risk on or not. No matter how big or small a risk is, it's up to the individual to decide whether they want to take that risk on. Government should never be able to impose that kind of decision onto a person. And yet we lived through that from September of 2022 until March of, or rather September of 2021 until March of 2022. We lived under that for about 6 months. And now, if it wasn't for the way, I would imagine that almost all the educational workers are going on strike. Probably 80-90% of them have taken the jabs, if not close to 100%, because I believe they were mandated. And it was only those of us who had the wherewithal to stick to our guns at enormous cost that have been able to refuse the non-vaccinating vaccines. So I don't know where things are going to go. I imagine this action is going to drag on for weeks, and it's polarized. It's basically, if you're a conservative-minded individual, you'll support Doug Ford and be opposed to Justin Trudeau. So everything Trudeau does is good and everything Doug Ford does is bad, or vice versa. If you're a conservative, if you're liberal-minded, it will just line up politically. Trudeau's either good or bad. Ford is either good or bad. Everything Justin Trudeau does is right or wrong. Everything Doug Ford does is right or wrong. Personally, I tend to navigate the two. I don't consider myself a liberal or a conservative. I look at issues on an individual basis. I don't like the fact that the educational workers have gone on strike. However, that is their legal right. And so I have to support their asserting of their legal rights. They have a legal right to strike. And this notwithstanding clause or the Emergency Measures Act, either way, that's just the government being heavy-handed, overreaching, and it's wrong. Trudeau is the most duplicitous moron who has ever been on the political landscape in this country. He's admonished Doug Ford, saying that the notwithstanding clause should only be used in the most egregious and emergency type situations. And yet Justin Trudeau, basically used the Emergency Measures Act, which is the equivalent of the notwithstanding clause. It's even worse than the notwithstanding clause because it basically gives the government the right to completely ignore all of our Constitution. In a fashion, it is martial law. People can be detained without habeas corpus, without being told why they're being detained. They can just be snatched up off the street. Justin Trudeau's father had used the War Measures Act back in, I think it was 1971, 1972, during what was called the FLQ crisis. A minister of the Quebec government, Pierre Laporte, had been kidnapped and was eventually murdered. There were mailbox bombs going off in Montreal, and this was all by this FLQ, Le Front de la Libération du Québec, that wanted independence for Quebec, and they were using violent means to try and achieve their goal. And a lot of people living in Ottawa and in Montreal in particular were very afraid. And so Pierre Trudeau imposed the War Measures Act, which suspended people's civil liberties. It basically meant martial law. And In point of fact, Canadians, according to all the polling and all the history and all the documentation on it, Canadians supported the invocation of the War Measures Act, which is the same as this Emergency Measures Act. It's the same legislation, just it was updated. And it's the simple fact of the matter is that a frightened population wants, they gravitate toward authoritarian style governance. People who are scared and frightened look for a savior. And people were in Ottawa, people were scared and frightened of these horrible protesters who weren't afraid of the SARS-CoV-2 bug. And when someone doesn't share your fear, they're a threat to you. And so everyone who's deathly afraid of SARS-CoV-2, who thinks that they have to suck air through a dirty piece of cloth or they're going to get horribly sick and dying, applauded Trudeau's suspension of constitutional rights and freedoms. Now, when it comes to Ontario, Doug Ford is likely going to, and they're already doing this, they're amping up the messaging, talking about we're protecting the children. The only thing is most Canadians don't really care about kids. We're selfish. Let the kids suffer. We lived through it through 2+ years. Kids going outside to play in a park. There was a kid outside in Ottawa playing basketball on his own. He got a fine in the hundreds of dollars. Screw the kids is basically the manner in which most COVIDians live, because their fear of SARS-CoV-2 trumps their humanity. And how are things going to end up? I can see Doug Ford, maybe he'll pull a Ronald Reagan and just fire them. That's something that happened early in Ronald Reagan's time when he was president of the United States. Shortly after he became president in 1980, air traffic controllers in the United States went on strike. And they were federally regulated. And so Reagan basically issued an ultimatum, go back to work or you're fired. And a number of air traffic controllers in the United States were fired. I don't know if that's feasible in Ontario. I don't know if Ford would have that option available, because custodians, secretarial staff, these educational assistants are vital to a functioning school system. And I don't know how feasible it would be simply to retrain and hire new people. It would be interesting to see. But I think, if I was on the communications team for Doug Ford in terms of trying to sell and spin this, I would have him going full Helen Lovejoy. Just think of the children, the damage being done to our children. And I would harp on that and paint the QP members as being uncaring towards the plight of children who have suffered for 2+ years without sports, without clubs, without all manner of activities, all over fear of a stupid little viral bug. So we'll see. As always, we'll see what the coming days, weeks, months, spring. We are going through in Ontario an unbelievably warm stretch. Someone was telling me, I haven't checked it yet, but they were telling me that tomorrow there's going to be a humidex rating, that the temperature is projected to be 25 degrees Celsius with the humidex. We're getting up into the 70s using the old Fahrenheit scale. And we're talking about early November. When I was a kid growing up, it wouldn't be unusual to see snow at this time of year. And the one thing is, in terms of COVID and RSV and flu and all the other viral bugs that pass around, during the warm weather, viruses don't spread that much. That's why we call it flu season. And this warm weather, I think, is granting us something of a reprieve, or it's delaying what is inevitably coming. There's already been reporting on surging cases of COVID, RSV, influenzas, and this, at the end of the day, this whole educational workers strike in Ontario may end up being little more than a distraction to the main show that's coming. The main show being the overwhelming of our hospitals and our healthcare sector. I've got the hot mess mom. We will get done this strike and it will be Christmas break. Our kids are so far behind where they should be. The real question is, will we ever be caught up? I have, I'll just speak a bit from my own personal experience. I have a little guy, he is in the 4th grade. And I'm hearing a lot of parents talking about the fact that their kids are behind socially, that their kids are emotionally scarred by all things COVID, that they don't know how to socialize anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm grateful for the fact that my little guy is, I think he's 100%. I mean, during COVID, the first year, I would go, any like-minded person. I mean, I respected people who were, no, you can't come over. We have to be in our bubble. But everyone knew my attitude, and so we got together with people and we did what we could to be as normal as possible. You know, to be an oasis of sanity in an ocean of insanity. When 2021 rolled around that summer, after I'd left the forces, and I was no longer restricted to remaining 50 kilometers within a 50-kilometer radius of my unit, then things opened up and we started traveling all over the place. And I've spoken often about the fact that we went to Aylmer, Ontario, where that Church of God Restoration, where they meet every Sunday without masks, without distancing, without hugging. I found a church up in Peterborough, Ontario, called Hill City Baptist in April of 2021, where, you know, people shake hands, embrace, no mask, no distancing. And my little guy got to play with friends, you know, play with other kids his age who were not living in fear, not hiding behind a mask, thinking they're going to kill their grandmothers. The damage we've done to our kids is the worst aspect of all of this. And I know it's tough to say to CUPE workers who are making 39 grand a year and struggling to make ends meet with gas going to $1.70, 80, 90 a liter, and inflation. You know, the grocery store, your grocery bill is going up 25, 30 bucks every month. And I know it's tough to say, just suck it up, but it would be nice, you know, if they would, but that's not going to happen. It's an unrealistic hope. So anyway, I've rambled on for 29 plus minutes. God bless. If you like it, thank you for the likes. I got my little dopamine rush. If you want to subscribe, I can't believe it, I'm at 60. 60 people who are incredibly bored and probably have no access to any other news or information and want to hear the ramblings of this old guy in Eastern Ontario. Anyway, I'll probably see you again in a couple nights. Enjoy the warm weather. And thank you, Kevin. And I keep saying Kevin when it's Kelvin. Apologize. Anyway, and punk my video. Good night.